It's fair to say that there's a pretty significant divide between the fields of spirituality and religion. And when we talk about religion, and in particular Western culture and Christianity, we're obviously talking about God and Jesus and the Bible, a physical book of doctrine, and a whole structure of authority in the world to accompany and to accentuate that religious paradigm. Spirituality is certainly very different to that. Spirituality really doesn't acknowledge Jesus in any way in terms of the way Christianity does, and is certainly not Jesus-centric. It is not doctrine-centric, and it is certainly not one paradigm-centric. The field of spirituality, as we understand it, is multifaceted, to say the least, in terms of what it incorporates in regards to Western belief, Eastern philosophy, yoga, meditation, all of those paths including Buddhism, philosophy as well, as many of the Western-based modalities and health and alternative modalities. All of that is included in spirituality too, and a whole lot more. It's significantly more diverse than religion. And so there really are quite distinct playing fields. They are very different and have their own characters and beliefs and so forth. And you will find, even though you hear of religion having more of a vocal response against spirituality, in truth, spirituality as a field and the people within the field are really just as against religion. And while they may not have a problem with Jesus so much, Jesus is not a part of generally the spiritual person's life, and the spiritual person will see, and quite rightly so from outside of religion, Jesus as very much hijacked by religion and by the church, and that there really is nothing accessible about Jesus and no real reason to focus on Christ because of all of the stuff, because of the Bible, because of religion, because of the church, and all that comes with Jesus, as has been claimed by the religion. And so that divide is perpetuated and continued throughout time, and we certainly see it in today's culture where spirituality is certainly moving into the practices of connecting to spirit, but there is no recognition of God or a supreme creator. We talk universe and source and words like this, but they are very benign words, and so it is a godless field specifically, and it is not Jesus-centric. And so for most of my life, I've come from the field of spirituality. I am a Reiki master and Seishin master, and am qualified in a number of different health and alternative health modalities, therapeutic modalities, counselling, all of that sort of work, and I've done that professionally and full-time for 25 plus years of my life. So I certainly know that sector very well, and only recently in the last few years have really started to explore religion a little more intensively, and in particular again Christianity and the stories and aspects of Christ and of the life of Jesus. And so I've, with a good primer to learn and a good sort of framework for spirituality under my belt for a long time, I found it very helpful to approach religion much later in my life with a much more kind of mature palate and mature radar for sifting value through that which is not so valuable, or that which is, I guess, put in there to put you off the scent, maybe. I found that my exploration of religion was quite deep and thorough and quite rapid, probably more so than at any other time in my life, because I was really hungry for it and looking for something new, having exhausted spirituality thoroughly, and realizing that all that I believed and wanted from spirituality and thought that was meant to bring me in my life, it wasn't really happening when I considered the benchmarks of what it means to be spiritual and to live a spiritual life and to practice a spiritual lifestyle. When I considered ultimately what all of those things meant to me and what I really wanted from them and expected from having a spiritual life and participating in spiritual practice and so forth, it wasn't quite hitting the mark for me. It wasn't quite reaching the goal. And so I quite sincerely sort of jumped the fence into the religious pool, and wanted to have a bit of a feel for God in Firstly, the place that God sits within our world, which is religion, in terms of areas to begin exploring God academically and theoretically. And so that has been the last few years of my life, and really jumping headlong into exploring the life and teachings of Jesus and the ways of Christ, both through the Bible and through the Gnostic teachings and the Aquarian teachings, and all of that. And so I've developed quite quickly a good understanding of the ways of Jesus and the ways of Christ in the last few years as well, in ways that I guess some Christians would understand and other traditional Christians may not. But again, that's been my spiritual background, and I would say one of the benefits and the gifts of that background, that I approached Christianity with far greater discernment and reasoning and rationale, and a lack of blindness, which was helpful. And so I have come to this place in my life now where I have explored spirituality quite extensively and really do get it in terms of what its function is in its way, and what it is really offering the world and what it really offers people in terms of the way home, the way to God, the way to get to the last page of the book, the end of time, the grand climax of climaxes, whatever you want to say that is for yourself. You do go on forever until you stop. And that point really is God, in whatever word that you want to kind of consider that. And so when we go to that point, obviously there is a way there within time, and all of the many practices and modalities and approaches and paradigms and frameworks and all of those things as components of spirituality are all different ways to kind of get to God, to get home. And this is the one thing that spirituality has in spades. It very much supports the way, but for whatever reason keeps the final goal shrouded. It doesn't want to name God as God. It doesn't want to really acknowledge God, and uses very weak substitute terms like the universe and like source. I mean, it doesn't take much to think about, well, who created the universe? It's a bit of a strange term to use, and it's quite obvious when you look at it that it's a God avoidance term. And so there is a bit of a gap in spirituality, not in the way, however, and not in the methodology component. A lot of that learning is essential and really valuable in the path. But it is missing the final point of trajectory and the goal and the reason for pursuing all of those things, which is why so many people in spirituality pursue a spiritual life forever and don't really get anything, don't really get anywhere, don't get something definable from it in a way that they can say, this is what my spirituality and my spiritual lifestyle does for me. They might have a lot of books and talk about it a lot and be part of Facebook groups, but there's nothing truly evidentiary and substantial in their life. And that is because their life is not God-centric. It is not home or last page of the book centric, which is really what it needs to be. Religion, on the other hand, is in theory totally all about the last page. It is all about re-establishing our place and space in the kingdom of God and in home and as part of God, which truly is all about the last page. But what you'll equally notice is that while Christianity solely focuses on that, there's really little to no focus whatsoever on the ways of going about that. There's very little how-to, there's very little operational kind of stuff. And so it really leaves people in a frameless space without really knowing what to do with it. And so God within themselves loses a bit of power, because we just don't know how to do God on a day-to-day basis, where we might know how to do meditation and yoga and stuff on a day-to-day basis. But if it's not ultimately framed by a higher power or something greater than ourselves and a greater purpose to connect with it, then really we're just going through the motions as much as, say, praying and using the word God and all of that, but really having no belief or faith in God. You can go through the motions, but it's not really going to hit the mark, and so nothing's going to happen for you. It won't be a meaningful act. And so it's a very interesting dichotomy when you think about both paths. And I've been fortunate to have experienced enough of religion now as well. And I wouldn't even say religion per se, because very quickly I sort of moved through and moved past Christianity, realizing and quite plainly seeing that the jewel of the religion, the one part of the whole of Christianity that was really worth looking at, I would say not just more than every other part, but absolutely instead of every other part, is Jesus. Jesus really is the key. And a lot of people will go, yeah, but Christianity is based on Jesus. Yeah, look, I thought that too. And even though it's called Christianity, and that seems to be about Christ and followers of Christ, let me tell you that for those of you who are completely Bible ignorant, the bit about Christ really is just a small section of the back. It is nowhere near the majority of the book that we know of the Bible today. It really isn't about Christ, and the bulk of the book, being the Old Testament, is certainly not about Christ at all. And so in terms of the book representing the religion, and the religion being about Christ as emulated by Jesus and only Jesus, as defined by Christianity, it's not really a clear expression of what it's about, if you understand what I mean. It's a very unusual thing to explore and to find out, assuming that basic stereotype is true. And again, people might have thought that was a bit stupid, but I only realised later in my life all of these basic facts, having only explored the Bible quite later in life, and realised there's so little in here about Jesus and about Christ. And so the Bible in itself was sort of a deterrent in many ways until I had the primer, until I had the guide to find the starting point for me. And really the starting point for me, as would be for many people, is not on the first page or anywhere near the Old Testament. It's right near the back at the start of the New Testament. And where it all begins in terms of the story of Christ and the story of Jesus. And so to bring it back to Jesus and to just sort of set aside the Old Testament and the bulk of that religion for the purpose of this, bringing it back to Jesus, there's a few different ways that we sort of know Jesus and talk about Jesus. And so I wanted to just sort of refer to some of those and sort of get to the Jesus that I know the best, and the Jesus that is most relevant and true for me in my life, and that I see for other people. Within Christianity, of course, we have the Jesus of history, and we know Jesus from a purely historical perspective. And of course, there is some discrepancy around that, even from Jesus' actual year of birth and where he was through significant periods of his life. Obvious discrepancies around first-hand accounts. The vast majority of the Bible is all second-hand and third-hand accounts. They were not people who were direct witnesses of any part of Jesus' life. And so really there's no truly accurate information in direct relation to the man that we know as Jesus 2,000 years ago. There is plenty of information and accurate information about the culture, the times, the ways, the community that Jesus would have grown up in and lived around, but not specifically about the man per se. And so most of the information we have is not what you would call really accurate. But we do know the historical Jesus. We recognise that Jesus certainly did exist, certainly did commence ministry, certainly did claim to be the Son of God and claim to be the Messiah, and by virtue of that was penalised by Rome with his life, and was persecuted by Rome as a self-proclaimed heretic. You don't get to say anything that goes against the overarching power of Rome, and by claiming oneself as the Messiah, that was really the highest form of treason that one could commit. And so obviously Jesus met an end fitting to that form of punishment. And so that is the Jesus of history that we know. And of course, the bulk of it is largely agreed upon, but with loads of it up for a lot of debate because of historical accuracy and so forth. So the Jesus of history is certainly one Jesus that all of us know, or at least know of to some degree. It is the reference just to the man. The other aspect of Jesus, though, that people don't really understand so much and therefore don't refer to so much, however, really the whole religion is based on, is not Jesus himself, but of Christ. Now, we recognize Jesus as a man in history, but we don't really have a deep and solid understanding of what we mean by Christ. We say the word Christ as if it was a surname, and in truth, the correct term would be Christ Jesus, or Jesus the Christ. It is a reference to a level of spiritual attainment, more than any kind of a reference to a name or a title per se. And so to understand and develop a deeper understanding and relationship to what we mean by Christ and an understanding of that gives us a whole other perspective of Jesus. And this is the aspect of Jesus that we would say is set apart from other men, that was supernatural and where he claimed to be the Son of God, where Jesus was able to perform miracles, where Jesus taught in a way that was revolutionary and wholly God-centric to the people and the culture of the time, the ways of Jesus that were wholly not of the world and not of man, and much of that aspect of the man that has stood the test of time was not solely about Jesus, but about what made Jesus divine, and that is the aspect we call the Christ. And so that is not the Jesus of history, that is the Christ of faith. That is the aspect of Jesus that truly religious and spiritual people connect with and have relationship with and believe in and respect and worship. And see above not just the physical life of Jesus the man, but of the far greater dimension to that man, whether that be the Son of God or however he is perceived. He is certainly agreed on as being something far greater than a regular man. And so the Jesus of history is one Jesus we know, but the Christ of faith is really another and a whole other aspect of Jesus that can be understood and studied and related to almost independently to Jesus. And it is worth understanding that, at least, if not exploring that a little bit on your own, to understand what that means. And so to bring those two sort of parts of Jesus back together, it may be what it has been termed in a particular text, the Aquarian gospel. You might sort of refer to this as the Aquarian Jesus. That is the Jesus that we know in Jesus' capacity as a divine being, as the Son of God. He is not just Jesus a man, he is a particularly spiritually developed and anointed man. He is a higher vibrationary man, if you like. And so there is something unique and spiritually set apart about that man. And so in that sense, Jesus most certainly has attained a level of spiritual development far exceeding those who were with him at the time. And so to look at Jesus in the sense of Christ and in the sense of being a divine being and a being of God, a spiritual being in all the ways that we understand that element and dimension to Jesus, there's a really interesting crossover when you reconsider spirituality again. And having sort of come from spirituality for such a long time and now really having explored Jesus and Christ for such a period of time, something really has occurred to me, and the more I consider it, the more I realise it surprises me greatly that it hasn't happened yet. And I guess it really is just a testament to religion and to the degree that Christianity has truly hijacked Jesus, in the way that Jesus, even the Christ of faith, is really not accessible to anyone outside of that religion and outside of anyone who claims to be Christian and religious. If you are not Christian, we really don't show an interest in Christ. If you haven't read the Bible, if that's not your thing, we really show no interest in Jesus, even though we know something of Jesus. but we don't actually engage in that in a way of genuine interest. We somehow just get lazy and say, no, I don't want to do the Bible, I don't want to do the religious part of it. But what's interesting is you really can explore Jesus independent of all of these things. And Jesus is very interesting when you do explore Jesus and the Christ of faith independent of the religion and of the Bible, because there's a fantastic correlation that just hasn't been made yet that I believe sometime in the future will be recognized by the spiritual profession and by spirituality as a field. Because the one thing that the spiritual industry has not really recognized is that for all that spirituality does in terms of connecting more authentically and more from a heart-centered space with people, family and community and friends as a way to be a more authentic being and a more heart-centered being, as a way to raise our vibration and a way to develop energetically via practice and skills and actual areas of mastery, as a way to produce healing and as a way to operate in the capacity of a healer and as a healer that surpasses anything that spirituality offers in terms of its reikis and its various modalities. I mean, we're talking the work of the miraculous as demonstrated by Jesus and emulated through Christ. We're talking all of those things. We're talking the path of the yogi. We're talking the path of science and the science of spirituality. We're talking all of the Eastern practices, breathing, meditation, yoga, all of those things. There is so many things that Jesus, when you remove him from religion and all of the trappings of the Bible and all of that stuff, and you just bring Jesus back into the fore of your attention, and particularly Jesus the Christ, the Aquarian Jesus, back into the fore of your attention, you'll realize as a spiritual person living a spiritual lifestyle that you probably haven't realized that of all of the books you own, of all of the people you listen to and teachers you listen to on YouTube and all of the people you look up to and seek as role models and all of these things, the one person I bet that you've never really considered as the prime teacher in the spirituality field is still Jesus. You're talking healing. Jesus was a master healer. You're talking heart-centered connection and authentic relating. Jesus had that mastered. You're talking all sorts of practice. You're talking alchemy. You're talking the ways of the yogi. You're talking meditation, the practices of breathing, the science of spirituality. Jesus was a master of all of these things, and so many people don't realize this. And so in terms of Jesus' relevance to spirituality, there is no one more relevant to spirituality. And I mean spirituality aside from religion. But Jesus just doesn't even get a look in within the spirituality field. And it really is crazy. And having come from spirituality now, spent enough time around Jesus, I really find it very surprising and potentially inevitable that sometime, somewhere, the spirituality industry is going to look up out of its kind of benign paradigm of godlessness, and someone's going to get a whiff of Christ Jesus and then retranslate the relevance and the power of Jesus back into spirituality in a way that is wholly different to religion, that completely sets Jesus Christ free from Christianity and from religion, and allows Jesus to be re-accessible again to every man, and in particular to spirituality, where Jesus should sit even more comfortably without the trappings of religion and without doctrine, because spirituality doesn't have that, and spirituality as a field is sorely in need of the last page, which is a re-emphasis on God, not a de-emphasis of God in the use of terms like universe and source. God is what is missing in spirituality, and Jesus through Christ is the bridge to God in that way. We just don't see it because religion has hijacked that aspect of ourself. and we are blind to it, and it is an illusion sort of wrapping itself around Christ and around Jesus. And I assure anyone who would identify as a spiritual person or living a spiritual lifestyle that if you've never really given religion much time or really reject sort of the Bible and Christianity in yourself in preference for spirituality, I would really suggest to you and strongly recommend that you reconsider the relevance of Jesus in your practice and the relevance of Jesus in your spiritual goals for yourself in terms of your personal and social development, in terms of your skills development, in terms of your spiritual reconnection to source and to self. Jesus really eclipses any of the modalities, the books and the teachers that you're currently experiencing. And I can really say that from my own experience because I didn't realize it either. I was immersed in YouTube books, teachers, speakers, all sorts of things like that, and all of them offer tremendous value, there's no doubt about it. But each of them are truly just facets of the one crystal, and there are different ways to grasp your crystalhood, and one is one facet at a time, but that really is an inefficient way to do stuff. The thing about Jesus, when you get him out of the religious framework, is that you realize he is actually the template for all aspects of contemporary spirituality. And no matter what your flavor or area of interest is in contemporary spirituality, Jesus really has an answer for you. And I would encourage you to explore many of the texts, the documentaries, the writings about Jesus outside of religion and outside of the Bible. The Aquarian Gospel is a fantastic place to start. So is A Course in Miracles. The BBC documentary on the history of Jesus prior to his ministry is a great place to start. There's lots of good stuff on YouTube. We just don't realize the mountain of material about Jesus independent to all of the frames and beliefs and paradigms that you typically know him to be associated with. The thing we must remember is that Jesus, as we know him, as the man that we know him, came onto the scene in his early 30s, and for a good 15 or so years, Jesus was completely missing in his life according to the Bible. The Christian tradition doesn't recognize anything within that significant amount of Jesus' life. It's more than half his life. And that time is provided no focus whatsoever and given no relevance whatsoever to the becoming of Jesus. But I can tell you that there is a mountain of information and a mountain of evidence of Jesus' travels through Tibet, through Greece, through India, through various parts of the world, as he learned and trained as a yogi and learned various skills in various countries and cultures before coming onto the scene publicly and commencing ministry in Jerusalem as we knew him. Jesus did not grow up in his hometown and home area the entire time. Jesus spent a significant amount of time traveling overseas, and it doesn't take much to research this information and to create a much bigger picture for yourself about a Jesus that you don't know. And in spirituality, the Jesus that you don't know, at least for myself, I have found was the answer to my spiritual seeking. Jesus really did provide the sign and the goal and the way, the operational manual, the very functional kind of how-to way to develop healing in an authentic way, my connection to God in a way that transformed my meditation, my understanding of yoga, my understanding of so many things have been sharpened significantly through my deepening relationship and deepening understanding and exploration of Jesus and Christ. I really am interested to see somewhere in the future who in spirituality is going to pick up on Jesus and realize that that Jesus fits so beautifully into the spiritual field in a way that no other aspect of the Christian religion or religion as a whole really could. The Bible as a single source doctrine could not. The religious structures and authority really could not fit neatly within spirituality as we know it, even established spirituality. Jesus alone really is the missing link to the spirituality field, and what all of those modalities and areas of pursuit and development and learning are missing. It's been a very interesting revelation to see Jesus slot so comfortably into spirituality, and I really do look forward for the almighty penny dropping in the spiritual field, for spirituality to finally remember Christ and to see Jesus for Christ, and that Christ is what every spiritual person is aspiring to be and aspiring to do, and the model by which people are aspiring to live their life. That is a Christed life. Even within the Buddhist traditions and other more formal traditions in that way, there is nothing contradictory when following the life of Jesus and Christ outside of Christianity and religion. I'd strongly suggest you check it out, guys, especially if you would consider yourself a spiritual person or living yourself a spiritual life. Jesus really is an element that could absolutely enhance what you're doing and enhance your life and your practice. God bless.